Life as We Knew It. Chapter 8, page 143, July 31st. Dad says however much wood we think we're going to need, we're actually going to need a whole lot more, and the most important thing he can do while he's here is chop. He also said we can't store the wood outside, even right by the side of the house. It'll be gone by October, he said. Nothing's going to be safe. Mom thought about it and decided the best place to store the firewood was the dining room, since we never eat in there anymore. Not that we ate there all that often before. So after breakfast this morning, which we all ate, we moved the furniture out of the dining room and into the living room. All the breakables had to be moved first, and it was tricky because we couldn't wrap things up in newspaper like we would have if there still were newspapers. But we didn't break anything. Then came the furniture, the break front and the sideboard, and the table and chairs. Even Lisa carried chairs out, although Dad watched over her like she was one of the breakables. The living room looks like a used furniture store, Johnny said. Like an antique shop, Mom corrected him. Either way, the living room is pretty much unusable now, but we haven't been spending much time in there anyway. Once the furniture was moved, Dad and Matt went out to cut down trees. Johnny and I carried the logs we already had into the dining room. Mom covered the dining room floor with sheets so it wouldn't get permanently scarred. After we finished bringing the firewood in, Johnny went out to help Dad and Matt. I went into the woods and collected more kindling. I think I crossed onto Mrs. Nesbitt's property, but I know she won't mind if I take some of her kindling. She really ought to move in with us. I don't know how she's going to make it through the winter otherwise. I'm so used to skipping lunch that I did without thinking about it, which is pretty funny. The first time in ages when we don't have to worry about food, and I skipped a meal anyway. Supper was a disappointment, just tuna fish and canned string beans. Somehow I'd imagined a feast. Mom and Lisa actually giggled when they saw my reaction. We're going to have a real dinner party on Tuesday, Mom said. Just hold on. A real dinner party. I wish we'd saved the dining room until then. But even if the food wasn't so exciting, supper tonight was actually fun. It was great having Johnny back, and it was his first chance to tell us about what camp had been like. A lot of the kids hadn't shown, which meant more food for the ones who were there, but fewer guys to play ball with. And the farm work was hard, especially in the beginning. But after the sky had been gray for a while, the animals began feeling the difference, and the chickens didn't lay as many eggs, and milk production went down. Only we didn't want to talk about that, so we switched topics real fast. Dad told jokes, and it was so funny watching Mom and Lisa's eyes roll. But I think the best thing that happened today was that Horton finally forgave Johnny for leaving. Horton's been ignoring Johnny since he got home. He's been sitting on Matt's lap, on my lap, on Mom's lap, once even on Dad's lap. And since Lisa doesn't want to have a thing to do with him, Horton's been flinging himself at her. We've all been laughing about it, except maybe Lisa, and maybe Johnny, and maybe me, since I keep remembering how hysterical I was at the thought of having to tell Johnny his precious Horton was gone forever. But tonight after supper, we sat around in the sunroom with our lovely battery light shining, and Mom crocheting while Lisa watched, and Dad, Matt, and Johnny and me playing Monopoly, which was irresistible to Horton, who had to knock pieces around. Once he'd established the floor was his turf, and he was allowing us to use it out of his great benevolence, he checked us all out and then curled up right next to Johnny and demanded to get his head scratched. Which Johnny did. Horton purred like a kitten, and for a glorious moment all felt right with the world. August 1st. It turns out Mom's definition of a dinner party is us, Dad and Lisa, Mrs. Nesbitt, and Peter. I think it's a little weird for Mom to invite Peter, but then again it's weird having Lisa staying here, so why not? Mom asked me to bike over to Mrs. Nesbitt's to let her know, and then to Peter's office to invite him. Johnny's been chopping wood from the trees Dad and Matt have been cutting down, so I was the one most available. Mrs. Nesbitt's been huffy about Dad ever since the divorce, but when I invited her, she practically glowed with excitement. I'm not getting out very much these days, she confided, which struck both of us so funny we laughed until we cried. I biked into town inhaling dank, ashy air and went first to Peter's office, only there was a sign on his door saying he'd closed his office and could be found from now on at the hospital. It wasn't surprising that Peter's office closed, but it was another one of those things that made me realize how different the world's become. The past couple of days have been so great. I'd been forgetting what's really going on. Even the gray, which I thought I'd never get used to, is just part of life now. Things are different when you know where your next meal is coming from. I went to the hospital, which was incredibly busy. I was stopped in the lobby and asked who I wanted to see. I said Peter, and it was personal. The hospital still has electricity, and it was weird seeing a building all lit up. It was like a fairyland, or at least like a theme park. Hospital land! It made me think of the amusement park dream I had a while ago. Of course, things were different at the hospital. The gift shop was closed, and so was the coffee shop. I guess it's a no-frills hospital, but even so, it seems magical. The security guard, armed, I noticed, paged Peter, and finally I was told to go to the third-floor east wing. Elevators are only for the sick, the elderly, and the handicapped, the guard said. I took the hint and used the stairs. Peter looked exhausted, but otherwise okay. I told him Dad and Lisa were with us, and that Johnny had gotten home safely, and that we were having a dinner party tomorrow night, and Mom wanted him to come. If Peter felt weird about it, it sure didn't show. He grinned almost as big as Mrs. Nesbit and said he'd be delighted. I haven't left here in almost a week, he said. I'm due an evening out. It's funny. I sort of dread Peter's visits. He always brings us something, even if it's just a can of spinach. But it feels like all he knows how to talk about are illnesses and death. But he looked so happy at the invitation that it made me feel good to know he'd be coming tomorrow for a real meal and a nice night out, even if it was with his kind of girlfriend, her kids, her ex-husband, and his pregnant wife, and, of course, Mrs. Nesbit. As I was walking down the hallway to the staircase, I ran into Dan. I was so startled to see him, I gasped. He looked just as shocked. What are you doing here? I asked him before he had the chance to ask me the same thing. My mother's here, he said. West Nile. She's going to be okay, but it's been a rough couple of weeks. I felt awful when I thought about how angry I'd been at him. Dan took my arm. There's something I want to tell you, he said. Where are you going? Just to the stairs, I said. Back home. I'll walk you outside, he said. And he removed his arm, which made me sad. Somehow I thought that his arm would slide down to my hand and we'd walk together like we used to. But instead, we walked like two different people, each with important stuff on our minds. We went outside up to the bike rack, where my bike chain was double locked. Miranda, Dan said, and then he stopped. It's okay, I said, just tell me. I'm going to be leaving soon, he said. Next Monday, probably. I would have gone sooner, but I wanted to make sure Mom was going to be okay before I did. I thought of Sammy and Dad and Lisa and wondered how many more people would be leaving my life. Do you know where? I asked. Dan shook his head. First we thought we'd all be going, he said, Mom and Dad and me, to California, because that's where my sister lives. Only we saw her name on one of the lists. That's how you find out. Nobody notifies you. You just see the name. Dad took it okay. He didn't go crazy or anything, but Mom was hysterical, and she kept not believing it. So I said if I could figure out a way, I would go. I wanted to tell him how sorry I was. I wanted to kiss him and hold him and comfort him. Instead, I just stood there and listened. Dad said that was a mistake, and we had to keep on living, and Mom was so beside herself it really didn't matter, he continued. You don't know what it's like. I'm glad you don't. Miranda, I'm glad this hasn't really touched you yet. I hope it never does. And then it was summer, and I couldn't really figure out what I was supposed to be doing, so I swam. And I thought about loving you, but it didn't seem fair to you or me, because Dad decided I should leave. It was his idea, and he told me first, before he told Mom, because he knew she'd get hysterical. He swapped his car for a motorcycle, and he taught me how to ride it. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to leave my folks or you, but Dad insisted, and I would have gone weeks ago, except Mom got sick. Dad and I both worried if I left while she was sick, she might not make it. But now she's recovering, and I need to get going while the weather is still okay. Dad says the first frost should be in a couple of weeks. In August, I said. Dan nodded.